during the Summer Olympics in Paris. That was the Summer Olympics where Eric Little won his gold medal for the 200 metres, and it's the subject of the Chariots of Fire. But the story I want to tell is a famous concert which was organised for that week with a famous singer. And so the opera house, the Paris Opera House, was absolutely packed. Every seat was taken, and there was a huge buzz as the stage manager stepped onto the theatre manager stepped onto the stage. And as he calmed the crowd down, he said he had to apologise that the singer who had been invited wouldn't be able to attend because he'd been involved in a car accident. Not a serious car accident, but he had to go to hospital to be sorted out. And so there was a groan from the audience, so much so that you couldn't even hear the name of the understudy that he announced. And so all through the first session before the intermission, there was that sense of unease. People had gathered to hear a particularly famous singer who wasn't there. And at the end of the first interval, nobody clapped. The understudy gave it his whole, he gave it everything, but there was just an awkward silence, which is very unusual, as you imagine. And then a little voice came from the balcony saying, "Daddy, I think you're wonderful." And of course, the crowd were admonished, and it resulted with they all stood up and clapped with a standing ovation. And that to me is a picture of encouragement. "Daddy, I think you're wonderful." But in terms of a picture for us, imagine instead of the child being in the balcony, it's the father on the balcony, and the child is on the stage, and nobody has clapped. And it's the father reaching out, wanting to comfort the girl, wanting to hold the child. And that's a picture of God's encouragement, of God's care, of God wanting us to be close. "Daddy, I think you're wonderful." And the Bible is full of promises, it's full of stories, but ultimately is a love story of how much he cares for us and how much he wants us. It's not about how much he needs us, but about how much he wants us. The reading in Romans that Andrea read, it talks about 7 gifts that are for the church. Prophecy, serving, teaching, encouraging, giving, leadership, and showing mercy. Now, there's another list in 1 Corinthians 12. Again, a list of gifts that God gives to the church, for the church. And they are miracles, healing, speaking in tongues, interpreting tongues. And I've heard lots of people, lots of Christians, argue about the gifts in 1 Corinthians 12, about whether they're meant for the church today or whether they're meant just for the church back in the birth of the church. You don't hear anybody arguing about the gift of helping, or the gift of serving, or the gift of encouraging. Nobody has any controversy in those. Men are always practice them. The gift of showing mercy. But they're listed as gifts for the church. And I'm going to talk about encouraging because I believe it is a particular gift. Some people have it. It's a very spiritual gift. It's a gift that's very useful for the church. And it's a gift that the church badly needs at our time. And I think where you get encouragement, God will be glorified. I often think of our church time we came to Ardfallon in 1988. We were there for many years in Cork City. But Jean Ritchie, who worshipped alongside us for so many years, you could not have anybody more encouraging. I worked in the church magazine. Every issue came out. She immediately came up to tell you what a great issue it was. Every time you preached, she immediately came to say, congratulate you on the sermon. It didn't matter how good the sermon was. She just had that gift of encouragement. And certainly, I can imagine many people come into the kingdom because of that gift. But encouragement, I'm going to look at it in three ways. Who needs it? What is it? And how do we exercise it? So who needs it? And the easy answer to that is we all do. I remember not long after we were married, Jan and I were watching a BBC documentary on depression. And it said that in every doctor's waiting room in the UK, 20% of the people there were suffering from depression. It's 1 in 5. No reason to think it would be any different in Ireland. It's probably greater now because the pressures on life are probably greater now than they were then. But it means that in any room for the people, there are people who are struggling with anxiety or depression. No outside bandages, no scars, no crutches or walking sticks, just that inner struggle to live. I often quote our family friend, Reverend Brian Callan. He wrote a wonderful book on grief, on bereavement, called Good Grief. He says, wherever 2 or 3 are gathered, one of them has a broken heart. And it's just an awareness of there are lots of people who struggle for different reasons. There are lots of people who are lost inside. It may be they're just lonely. It may be a loved one has passed. It may be a broken relationship from a son or daughter. It may be a grumpy neighbour. And the grumpiness may be just a face of loneliness. It's much more difficult to be grumpy than happy. Like the lady at the supermarket. You don't know what her story actually is. Postman bending down to post a letter. Maybe he has a bad back. Everybody has a story. And there's a lot of pain. And encouragement or a smile goes a long way to helping. The people who most need encouragement are those who are discouraged, but they don't have a label saying, I am discouraged. There was a lovely story told about the devil one day decided he was going out of business, if only. And he was going to sell all his tools of trade. He was going to have an auction. And so he lays them all out on the night of the auction. Malice, hate, envy, jealousy, greed, lust, deceit. And so they're all laid out on the table. And there's one tool which is a very awkward looking tool, big tool, and it's very expensive. And somebody asks him, what is it? And why is it so expensive? And the devil said, that's discouragement. And the reason it's so expensive is because with discouragement, I can get it in under the skin of people in ways that all the other tools can't. And so there's a sense in which the world is queuing up to discourage. And we should be on the other side, queuing up to encourage. So what is the gift of encouragement? It's a lot of different things to different people, but I'm going to build a wall of encouragement with different words, 5 in particular. The first one I'm going to take from the Oscar nominations. Back in 2012, Meryl Streep was being nominated. She'd been nominated for her 3rd Oscar. She'd already had an Oscar for Sophie's Choice and for Kramer versus Kramer. And she had just been in the film that year, The Iron Lady. And she was asked about her chances of getting the third Oscar. And what she said was, I'd rather be voted Mother of the Year by my family. Because nobody realizes that being a good mother is much harder than making a movie. Being a housewife and a mother is much more difficult. And I think one of the reasons it's more difficult is it doesn't always get the acknowledgement that it deserves. And so appreciation and acknowledgement are 2 of the foundation elements of encouragement. Just simply recognizing what people do on our behalf. Cooking dinner is a very different experience if people actually appreciate the dinner, appreciate the effort, appreciate the food in front of them. So appreciation and acknowledgement. Very simple. The next picture of encouragement I'm going to take from Mother Teresa. And she once said that being unwanted, unloved, uncared for, forgotten by everybody is a much greater hunger, a much greater poverty than the person who has nothing to eat. And she was speaking in a context of absolute poverty. But she was talking about being unwanted, being unloved, being forgotten about. She's famous for her kindness, for her giving homes to destitute in Calcutta. Sometimes they could just die with some dignity. And the challenge of Calcutta is equally the challenge of the Western Church. How many people miss church and nobody misses them? And there's a sense in which if somebody isn't at church, we should pick up the phone and make sure they're okay. Care. Because kindness and caring are two of the other blocks of encouragement. They're just the normal things that should make up our life. To encourage literally means to put courage in. And sometimes you actually have to take a bit of courage in yourself in terms of ask the right question. I remember when Michelle, our daughter, was about 4, we bought her a kite in the pound shop. It was a cheap kite, but we had her out on Castle Freak Beach flying it. And you know, it didn't matter if it fell in the rocks and got destroyed. She eventually got the hang of it, and there she was flying a kite. And it was giving her the sense that she could do it. When I was 14, I went to vocational school in the Dock. I wanted to be a carpenter. But the chemistry teacher said to me, you know, you could go to university. And that's probably why I'm standing here. I often have the discussion with my wife, how did I ever get here? Nobody in my home ever did a Leaving Cert. Nobody in my street ever did a Leaving Cert. The school I graduated from, the vocational school or the tech school, when I got my first degree, they hung a portrait of me on the wall as the first graduate from the school. We weren't an academic, but a teacher said, do you know what? You could go to university. It wouldn't have been something I would ever have thought of in the context in which I grew up. Encouragement. Taking time to say. Some years ago, an American professor, he gave a group of graduate students the task of going out and interviewing 200 boys in the Bronx. And they had to predict what was the likelihood of the boys spending some time during their lives in prison. So they went off, they interviewed the 200 students, and the prediction was that 90% of them would spend time in prison. 25 years later, another group of students were sent out to see how the prediction had worked out. And so they managed to locate 180 of the boys, and only 4 of them had spent time in prison, which was totally against what their prediction would have been. And so as they were interviewing those who they had been interviewed 25 years, they kept talking about a particular teacher. And so they tracked down the teacher to a nursing home and asked her, how did she have such a spectacular effect on the boys? And she said, I didn't do anything special, I just loved them. And so love is just equally added to that wall of encouragement. Acknowledgement, appreciation, care, kindness, and love. I could do nothing special. All I did was love them. And so how do we exercise the gift of encouragement? It's like going on a diet. You make a decision, you work hard at it until it becomes a habit, and then it carries on by itself. Anne Frank in her diary wrote, "It's wonderful that nobody needs to wait a single moment before starting to improve the world." Encouragement is really simple. It's all of those appreciation, acknowledgement, caring, kindness, love, but it's thinking about somebody else. It's active. It's searching out. It's looking for the positive. It's having something good to say rather than something negative to say. I talked with Jean Ritchie. I don't think in all the years I've known her, I've ever heard her say a bad word about anybody. The lady who started Weight Watchers is called Jean Niddick. In an interview, she was once asked, how was she able to help so many people? And she said that as a teenager, she used to walk in the park, and she used to see mothers standing beside swings, watchfully ignoring their children. And she would go up and she would push the kids. And pretty soon they were pumping their legs and had their own momentum. And that's what she said. She said she likes to give others a push. What a great rule, to push to be positive. A last word on gifts is from the biography of Evander Holyfield, the humble warrior. He's a former heavyweight boxing champion. He came after Muhammad Ali and George Foreman and those in the 90s. He was the first undisputed heavyweight champion when there were different weights. But he used to say, or he said in his biography, he grew up in a Christian home, and he describes how his grandmother would say, God didn't give you these gifts so you could sit down and be lazy. He gives you the gifts, but it's up to you to do the polishing. And every day you don't polish, you lose a piece of it. That's kind of the parable of Jesus' talents in a nutshell. Every day you don't polish it, you lose a piece of it. Encouragement is a gift from God for his children, by his children. It's not complicated, it's simple. Nobody's going to argue about it in terms of theology. It's not spectacular, but it is very powerful. We don't know a whole lot about Barnabas, really, in the book of Acts, except that he was called the son of encouragement. And therefore you have your own image of what Barnabas was like. So finally, 3 frogs sat on a log. This is a question for you. 3 frogs sat in a log. One of them decided to jump off. How many was left? Any answers? None. Any advance on none? My wife knows the answer to this question. 3 frogs sat in a log. One decided to jump off. How many were left? Ivan says none. Any other guesses? 3. Deciding to jump off is not the same as jumping off. And there are lots of things we decide to do, but it's like I was saying to William, nearly isn't even halfway there. We can have a good thought because but unless you do it, unless you follow it through. And encouragement is like that. And sometimes, and one further story. I remember a guy I worked with in Scotland. He was the grumpiest individual you ever came across. He really was a grumpy individual. He was a manager, he was an engineering manager. And people found it difficult to work with him. I remember sitting beside him one day at lunch, and not by design, just by accident, and we got chatting, and I discovered he and his wife fostered children. And they had fostered 50 children. And suddenly, the guy changed in my eyes. He didn't change. He was still grumpy. But I actually had a great respect for him. And I got on really well with him. Such to the point where people would come to me and ask me to get him to do something. He didn't change. But I value him differently because I now knew a bit of his story. And so encouragement is an interesting thing. So the message is, Go jump. Go out and encourage the world. Push for the positive. Let's just bow our heads in prayer.